On the morning of August 6, 1945, a city of 350,000 people woke up like it was any other day. Children put on their uniforms and walked to school. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts. Mothers prepared breakfast in small wooden kitchens, while the summer sun rose over the river. By 8:14 a.m., the streets were full. People were talking, laughing, moving through a city that had existed for over 400 years. At 8:15 a.m., it was gone. In a single flash of light, everything and everyone within a mile of the city center ceased to exist. This is the story of that morning. Not from 30,000 feet above, from the streets. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was there. The city sat on a flat river delta in southwestern Japan, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and open to the sea on the 4th. 6 rivers ran through it, splitting the city into islands connected by dozens of bridges. It was one of the most beautiful cities in the country. By 1945, the population had dropped from a peacetime peak of about 400,000 to around 350,000. Many residents had been relocated or drafted, but the core of the city was still very much alive. The downtown district was dense with wooden homes, shops, and narrow streets. Traditional 2-story buildings with sliding doors and tile roofs lined the main roads. Temples and shrines dotted the neighborhoods, their curved rooftops rising above the wooden skyline. The castle, built in 1589, sat at the center, a 5-story tower surrounded by moats and stone walls, one of Japan's great historical landmarks. The rivers were the city's lifeblood. Fishermen worked the waterways every morning. Wooden boats drifted under arched stone bridges. Willow trees lined the banks, their branches dipping into the current. In spring, cherry blossoms covered the riverbanks in pale pink. In summer, families gathered along the water in the evenings to escape the heat. The city had hospitals, universities, a military headquarters, and a thriving commercial district. There were theaters, public baths, markets full of fresh fish, and tea houses where old men sat for hours in the afternoon shade. The war had changed things. Food was rationed, young men were absent, anxiety lived just under the surface of everything. But the city still functioned. People still went to work. Children still went to school. Life continued, the way life insists on continuing, even when history is about to intervene. It was, by every measure, a real and full and breathing city. And in the early morning light of August 6, 1945, it had no idea what was coming. The morning was clear, warm, a blue sky with almost no clouds. Survivors would later remember how perfect the weather was. The air raid siren had gone off earlier that morning around 7 a.m. A single aircraft had been spotted at high altitude, but it left without incident. The all clear sounded at 7:31 a.m., and people went about their business. By 8 a.m., the streets were busy. School children walked in groups along the sidewalks, some carrying cloth bags, others holding hands. A group of middle school students had been assigned outdoor labor that morning. They were clearing fire breaks in the city center, pulling apart wooden buildings to create gaps that would slow the spread of fire during air raids. Thousands of students were doing this work across the city. They were between 12 and 15 years old. Streetcars rattled along their tracks through the downtown district, packed with commuters. Shopkeepers arranged goods behind sliding wooden doors. Mothers hung laundry in small courtyards. A man rode his bicycle across a bridge. A woman carried her infant on her back. Somewhere near the castle, soldiers were doing morning exercises in the courtyard. At 8:09 a.m., a few people glanced upward. A single silver aircraft appeared very high in the sky, so high it was barely visible. Most people who noticed it assumed it was a weather plane. There had been no air raid warning, no sirens, nobody ran, nobody took cover. The city kept moving. At 8:14 a.m., the sky turned white. There was no sound at first, just light. A light so bright and so total that it erased shadows, erased color, erased everything. Survivors described it as a flash that filled the entire world, brighter than 1,000 suns. For a fraction of a second, everything was white. Then came the force, a wave of pressure that moved outward from the center at hundreds of miles per hour, flattening everything in its path. Wooden homes that had stood for generations collapsed instantly. Tile roofs shattered, stone walls crumbled. Trees bent sideways and snapped. Bridges buckled. Streetcars were thrown from their tracks. Within seconds, nearly every structure within a mile of the center was leveled. The heat arrived almost simultaneously. At the center, surface temperatures reached thousands of degrees. Metal melted. Stone scorched. Human beings simply ceased to exist where they stood. Not later, not gradually, but instantly and completely. Further out, people were burned through their clothing, through their skin. The pattern of a kimono was scorched permanently into the flesh of those who wore them. The city did not fall. It was erased. Then silence. A deep, total, unnatural silence, where 350,000 people had been living and talking and breathing just moments earlier. There was nothing. Just dust. Just heat. Just stillness. The city center was unrecognizable, where downtown had been. The shops, the streetcars, the bridges, the castle, the temples. There was now a flat, gray, featureless plain. The landscape looked like it had been scraped clean. The 400-year-old castle was gone. The hospitals were gone. The schools were gone. The neighborhoods, with their wooden walls and paper doors and small gardens. All of it. Gone. A massive column of smoke and dust rose into the sky, climbing higher and higher until it towered over the mountains surrounding the city. On the outer edges, where the force was less total, individual scenes of devastation told the story. A clock on a wall, its hands frozen at 8:15. A bicycle frame fused to a bridge railing, a row of stone steps where a person had been sitting, their outline permanently etched into the surface by the flash. Roof tiles melted into shapes no tile should take. A child's lunchbox, its contents charred black, sitting in what used to be a schoolyard. The objects survived. The people didn't. That gap between the thing and the person who owned it is where the full weight of what happened lives. The rivers, once the city's most beautiful feature, were now something else entirely. Survivors described people walking toward the water from every direction, looking for relief, looking for safety. The riverbanks became gathering places for those still able to move. By afternoon, a strange rain began to fall. Black rain, heavy black drops that stained everything they touched. Survivors didn't know what it was. They just knew the sky had turned dark. The news took time to reach the rest of the world. Japanese military authorities initially couldn't understand what had happened. Communication from the city had simply stopped. When reconnaissance planes flew over later that day, they reported that the entire city appeared to have vanished. 3 days later, a second event struck the city of Nagasaki. 6 days after that, Japan announced its surrender. The war was over. The full scale of what happened at Hiroshima became clear only gradually. Estimates of the number of people lost that day range from 70,000 to 80,000 in the initial event itself. By the end of 1945, the total had risen to an estimated 140,000, nearly half the city's population, as the delayed effects took their toll. Behind each number was a name, a face, a family waiting at home. 140,000 is not a statistic. It is 140,000 individual lives, each one as full and complete as any life ever lived. The world had entered a new age. For the first time in human history, a single weapon had erased an entire city. And everyone, governments, scientists, ordinary citizens, understood that what had been done to one city could now be done to any city, anywhere, at any time. The rules of human civilization had changed in a single morning. If you visit the city today, you would never know what happened here. At first glance, the population has grown to over 1 million people. It is a thriving, modern Japanese city. But look closer, and the memory is everywhere. At the center of the city sits the Peace Memorial Park, built directly on Ground Zero. Inside the Peace Memorial Museum, personal belongings of those lost that morning are displayed behind glass. A child's tricycle, a school uniform, a wristwatch frozen at 8:15. Each item belonged to a specific person with a specific name and a specific life that ended on that specific morning. Every year on August 6th, thousands of people gather in the park to float paper lanterns on the river. Each lantern carries a message, a prayer, or a name. They drift slowly downstream in the dark, a river of soft, glowing light where the black rain once fell. The city chose not to forget. It chose to remember. And then it chose to rebuild. At 8:14 on the morning of August 6th, 1945, a city of 350,000 people was alive. By 8:16, it was not. What happened in between lasted less than a minute. What it changed will last forever.